So tonight we'll work on building your family search tree with Ancestry's help. And it's a topic I like. I've been using the information from this story even today, adding several more people into tree. So it's been kind of exciting. So this presentation hopefully will provide you with some tips and suggestions on how to build your tree at FamilySearch so that it's correct and that you add people in it correctly. And we'll use an organizational guideline pattern that I'm providing for you tonight. I'm going to pick a focused person, somebody that we want to work on. And from that person, we can demonstrate how to start with what's in FamilySearch and then use FamilySearch sources to help identify this person. Because, it's just like, the funny phrase they say, well, if you see it on Facebook, it's got to be true. Well, a lot of people say if you see it in FamilySearch, it's got to be true. Well, that's not always the case. So we want to learn how to use our FamilySearch sources to help identify this person to make sure they're for real. And then once we've exhausted FamilySearch sources, use Ancestry sources to help us increase our knowledge on this person, and then ultimately meld all this information that we've learned together and update FamilySearch. So this is kind of the pattern that we want to talk about. It's a good pattern to teach new patrons. I know it's something that some patrons aren't interested in. They don't want to do research. And so I try to provide a lot of lessons that are non-research based, because there's a lot of patrons that don't want to go that way. But for the ones that do, it's important that we learn how to show them ways to do this smart and do it to the best of, our abilities. Okay, so these guidelines to follow. Building a tree can be a challenge, and we don't want to just throw it together. Unfortunately, we see this a lot in FamilySearch. We see a lot of times where beginners especially have gone in and just thrown things in there because they look good and they haven't really thought things through. So what we do is we begin by identifying a target person. That person's in tree. But the question is, before we get started, we want to know, is that person really the person that we want to work with? Does this person really exist, for one thing, at one level? And does this person belong in that family? Those are the two levels that we need to consider. Because if the person doesn't really exist, we're really barking up the wrong tree. And if they don't belong in this family, we're causing a lot of problems. So what we want to do is take what we know, what we're shown, and go from it into the unknown to the things that we haven't seen yet that will help us to verify this person, either for good or bad. And so we're going to be working from known information to the unknown information. That's our first step. Then the second one is to try to verify all the facts on this person to begin with. And, what we're doing is we're verifying the person. We're trying to identify, is this person real? Do they really belong in this family? And that one's probably the big question. Does this person really belong to this family? And the third focus guideline here is to treat new facts like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And what we're trying to do is fit these pieces together to make the whole. Now, most often, the new pieces will fit. They won't always. That's one thing we have to understand, that, in fact, the more information we have about a person, the more variations we may find. We may find several variations in the way the name is spelled, or a birth date or place, or, all kinds of things. Because unfortunately, records are only as good as the record creator. And sometimes people deliberately faked things. Sometimes there's just mistakes that are made. So those things don't always fit together perfect, but they should fit in general pretty much in place. And, eventually, if we do a good job, we will have created a person, pieced together a person. Okay, the fourth guideline is to keep a record. Now, remember what I said at the beginning was we're looking at creating probably a lesson for a patron before we meet with them. And we don't really want to do the work in tree. So what we ought to do is keep a record of what we've done. Now, you don't have to go to the extreme that I'm showing you tonight. This looks like an awful lot of work, but quite honestly, a lot of it's just copy and paste from the transcriptions of records. And so it's not as hard to do as it looks like. But just assemble the information that you get on the person as you get it. And I kind of put it in a chronological order. And this helps me to know what I've found, and I can see how everything fits together. And unfortunately, though, sometimes long after the process begins, we discover that our initial assumptions about what were correct were wrong. But that's okay, because that's what we want to have happen if we're barking up the wrong tree. We don't want to help a patron put together a tree that's false. And so once in a while, because people have names that are the same, there can be problems. And we find that undoing the mistakes on an online tree can really be a challenge. So it's better to piece it together here. And then what I do that I haven't pushed in this lesson is then I can go with this information and I can go over into tree and do searches looking for these people to see if they're already there or not. Because we all know very often some of the people in the family, at least, are already there, even though they don't seem to be at first glance. And then this helps us organize the information. So when it is time to put the family together, we know exactly where we're going and what we're looking for, because we're going to be doing a lot of this by just sourcing records like censuses or wills or, things like that. Okay, so let's demonstrate one situation. So I started digging around in my tree, looking for a family that would be a good one to work with. And I was doing descendancy research. And I came to this family of Titus Shermer and Ellen Sands. Sands are one of my families that I do extensive research on. And I took one look at this family and I said, ooh, I think I want to play with this family. Before I go any further, I just want you to look at that and think, why did I say, oh, I think this will be a good family? There's a lot of things. One you can't see is they're in Pennsylvania, which is an area I like to research. Okay, now look at the little arrows. There's an arrow pointing to Maria. If you understand the descendancy chart, that means Maria's got at least a husband. There are some descendants, and a husband is considered part of the descendancy. Okay, she may or may not have children, grandchildren, but there's at least somebody attached to her. But there's no other arrows. Israel doesn't have one. Josephus, Romaine, Rosamond, Emma, Ellen, none of them have arrows, which mean they're dead-end people. Notice their birth dates. They're all within 15 years of 1850. And of course, 1850 is that wonderful census where we first see all the people in the family. We don't know how they're related, but we see them. So this is a family that has a lot of positive things going for it. I've got people that lived to 1916, 1915. Got one that only lived to 1862, and I've got several that don't have a death date. But we have a birth year, so we've got something to work off of. So I decided I would pick the first child in the family, Israel. And I figured I always like to pick the odd names. Cephas would have probably been a good one too. Romaine, I probably would shy away from that at first because the women are harder to follow. Not because you're sneaky, ladies, but because you go and change your last names. And that always makes things more difficult in tracing a woman. But the guys don't, so it's usually a little bit easier. So anyway, Israel Shermer just sounded like a good one to follow. He's not showing any wife or children. He's shown born in 1834. And he has two sources, which are really one. They're the 1850 census. So we know he lived to be 16 years old. He'd be 16 in 1850. So he got past that little baby stage when they die real young. So he had a better chance that maybe he lived longer. But it only has that one source. And it said that he was a painter. So I assume a house painter in those days. So Israel Shermer's going to be our focus person. We're going to work off of him. So it's time to verify him. Does he really exist? We know he's on that census, but is there really an Israel? Okay. Are there other people with this name? That would be my first question. Could there be other records in Tree? Now, this record's in Tree right now. I'm looking at a record of Israel Shermer in Tree. Could there be a duplicate in there? It says no possible duplicates. But I want to look at that similar people link on his person page to see if there might be another Israel in there that's a little different, but is really him. Could there be a duplicate in there? So I go over in the tools and I say, let's find similar people. And I pull them up, and this is what comes up. And that's not a mistake that it goes from Israel, which is my guy, to Catherine Shermer. What that's telling me is there are no other Israel Shermers in Tree. I put in there just Israel Shermer, 1834, Pennsylvania. And so I should have gotten, you would have thought some more, but they didn't. They gave me a Catherine Shermer, who's 1832. So that's a close, age difference. But apparently there's only one Israel Shermer in Tree, which really makes this interesting. It means there's not going to be a lot of Israels to go looking through as I work. Okay, so what else can I find on FamilySearch? What else can it tell me? So I'm going to go over to FamilySearch and go into their records. And I did a search that just said Israel Shermer, 1834 for birth in Pennsylvania, because that's all I know about him. And when I pull up the results, first place, there's only 80 results. And that's mainly because of the last name, because there's really only one record for Israel, one record that says Israel in it, the 1850 census, that one that we already have attached to him. And then there's a couple that have the initial I's in them, but at looking at them, they're not our guy. None of these are our Israel. So it could be possible that he died before the year 1860 when the next census came around. That's a possibility to consider. And so since there doesn't appear to be anything at FamilySearch, I'm already at the point where I need to go, let's go look at Ancestry. So I go over to Ancestry at FamilySearch on his homepage, Israel's homepage. I click on Ancestry. And I go over there and it's already filled in the information on him. What I want it to find is that 1850 census, because what I want to do now at Ancestry is I want to open up that 1850 census transcription and see what hints to other records are attached to that 1850 census. This is what makes Ancestry so valuable, because FamilySearch does this to a degree. Very rarely do you find more than one or two records attached to a record in FamilySearch where they say, here are some suggestions. At Ancestry, you can have a big long list. So I opened up the 1850 census on Israel, and there's this long list of possible records. But what is going on? Almost all of these records say Ezra. Ezra Shermer, Ezra Shermer, Ezra Shermer, Ezra Shermer. Here's an Israel, Ezra, Isra, and it's just plain old Shermer. What is going on? This is really strange. Okay, my first thought is this: you got to be careful with Ancestry's hints, because they're driven by what other people have done in attaching records to people in their tree. And if people are attaching records to wrong people, then the suggestions are going to lead you astray. So when you see something strange like this, you've got to beware right off the bat that there's something fishy, because Ezra is not a nickname for Israel. I mean, that's just not a nickname. Izzy would be a nickname, not Ezra. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of things at this point. First thing we're going to do is check out those public trees. I know some of you are saying, oh, please don't go there. But yeah, we're going to go look there to get some ideas and try to see if we can decipher what's going on here. And we're going to use Ancestry searching ability to search out the 1850 to 1880 census records to see what we can come up with. Okay, so first thing we did is went over to the trees. Now, in FamilySearch, it said Titus Shermer and Ellen Sands are Israel's parents. So I didn't go search for Israel. I went searching for Titus Shermer and Ellen Sands. And then I can go look at the family groups for these people and see if Israel's there and what's going on. And so I did a search, and there's only 24 trees. Notice on the first line, it says Titus Shermer is found in 24 trees. This gives the basic information about Titus, who his parents are, and who his wife is. So I know this is my Titus, and there's just 24 trees. Now, that sounds like a lot, but in Ancestry, you could have thousands of trees, literally, on one person. Some of your ancestors probably have them. So 24 is a pretty small number. So that lets me know there's not a lot of researchers doing this line. Okay, now here's what happened when I went looking at those trees. Almost everyone that has children for this couple, and some of them didn't have their children, just had the couple's names, they show the first child as Ezra, not Israel. And there was only one or two that showed Israel, but it's the same year, 1834, but most of them are using the name Ezra, not Israel. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. What's really going on here? Okay, and the answer came in the census records. So knowing now that I need to look for an Ezra just to see why people are naming him Ezra, I'll look for both Israel and Ezra and see what comes up. And this is what came up. I found this to be a person whose name morphs over time. I couldn't have found a better person to use for a demonstration if I had tried. This was just absolutely hilarious. Very rarely do you see this, but once in a while. Now, in 1850, he's Israel. He was 16, and he was living with his parents with 5 siblings, and he had the occupation of a painter. Now, Germantown is a town in 1850 outside of Philadelphia. If you went to Philadelphia today, it's practically in downtown Philadelphia. It's just like a neighborhood in inner city Philadelphia. But in 1850, it was just outside of town. Okay. In 1860, there's no Israel, but there's a Isra. His name's changed a little bit. He's now 28. He aged 12 years. He's single. He's a painter. And it was interesting. He had a disability, typhoid fever. And that's going to show up in a little bit. So just remember that. But the big thing is he's in Philadelphia. He's a painter. He's about the right age. He's living alone at this point. 1870, he's living alone still. He's only aged 7 years this time. And he's in a rooming house. He was marked as married in June, but there's no wife. That's kind of strange. And his occupation again is painter. See, that becomes a very important thing in showing who this person is. And then in 1880, living on Germantown Avenue, which means he's back over in Germantown, is Ezra, who's 10 years older now, with a wife, Annie, and 4 children. And so our Israel, I'm sure, because we have no other records, our Israel has to be this guy. He's still a painter. He's still living in Philadelphia. He's got a very unusual last name, Shermer. And so we're going to go with Ezra as our Israel, which now opens up a whole family. Okay. Remember, there's all these keys to tying it together: the location, the ages, the occupation, the fact that he was single and then gets married, still living in that area. Okay, so we still have a ways to go. At least we've got a start now. We've got an idea. Now the big question is, since Israel is the least likely name we're going to find him under, what about this Ezra? Is Ezra in tree? We need to be looking for that, because we don't want to just assume, well, because there was no Ezra in the family that we were working in, that Ezra's not in FamilySearch. So we take that 1880 census and we go looking, and there's actually 2 Ezras. One Ezra shows him married to Annie M., and there's 2 children there, Milton and Charles Edward. That's from the 1880 census. What's strange is there's 2 more kids on that census and nobody put them in. There's Norman D. and there's Carrie E. And for whatever reason, they're not listed in the family. And then the other one is a family that was created off of an 1882 birth record for a child that had no name given on the record. Now, 1882 would be after the birth of Carrie, so there's probably a 5th child in this family at least. And we don't know who it is, at least at this point. But there's these 2 families. So what are we going to do? We're going to need to merge these 2 families together. Ultimately, this will be one of the things I'd put in my notes. And then this family would need to be merged with Israel, so that I have a record that says the name is Israel or Ezra. You don't want to wipe out either name, because you could be finding them off of either the 1850 Israel or the Ezra. We probably ought to have that Isa as another alternative name ultimately. Okay, so we're starting to get a feel now for our guy. And we know that some of this is in tree, not all of it. Now at Ancestry, they still had some more records. And one of them shows that Ezra Shermer, who was born about 1833, which would be just right, joined the militia of Pennsylvania in the Civil War. Now, remember in 1860, it said that he had a typhoid. Or I think that was 1870. In the 1870 census, he had typhoid. And that would have probably been something he picked up in the military fighting. So interesting that some of these things kind of fit together. Okay, and then because he was in the military, Ancestry also has the death records for the military soldiers in the Union Army. And so we know that he died in Philadelphia in 1896, which means he won't be on the 1900 census. So it'll be useless to us to try to find him in 1890, which complicates the family a little bit, because it'd be nice to be able to find him specifically so we could see what children were listed with him in 1890, but he's died by that point. And that tends, when the father dies, the kids, if they're a little bit older, tend to break up and go their various ways. So it's going to make the family a little bit harder to trace. But I ultimately will be able to add these sources using RecordSeek to the record. And to show you how that would be done, the first thing you need to do is download RecordSeek. You go to recordseek.com and download, or just drag and drop their little widget into your Chrome or Firefox browser. I believe they work in both of those. And once it's in there, you have a little extension icon that's covered up right now. When you want to go use it, what you do, the first thing you do when you want to take a source at Ancestry, in this case, like this death record. Actually, it's what I call it, death certificates. Okay, this is the death certificate from Philadelphia. Okay, not the state, but the city death certificate. If I want to source this at FamilySearch, I would go to that little widget. I'll click on RecordSeek. It will then open up the screen where it says, well, do you want to put a source on FamilySearch or on Ancestry? Well, I'm in Ancestry. I don't need it for that. I need it for FamilySearch. So I click FamilySearch. And then this comes up. And this is their equivalent to SourceLinker. I guess the best way to explain it. What you want to do is check all the boxes along here, especially the bottom one where it says describe the record, because in here should be all those things you highlighted. That's what's nice about them, is that they're all listed in there. And I usually go through and do click in there and then hit enter and line them up so they're in a nice row. But I don't have that showing right now. But you want to check that they've got a title that makes sense, that they actually have the link from the transcription page. And we don't do it from the image. We do this from the transcription page, mainly so that we can have the transcription down here in the notes. People can click on the link to see the image. And then make sure it tells where the record came from. And if everything looks good, then the next thing you want to do is you want to tag the events. You want to go through and tag the things that show up on this record. And I noticed as I was going through this today, I should have clicked on birth, because it has his name, it has his birth year, it has his death date and place. So I should have had name, birth, and death. And I could have done gender too, I guess, or male. Well, once you get those clicked, you click close. And when the source is made, those will be tagged. And you click next. Now, the one thing you do before you start all this is you go to the person in tree and click on their ID number so that it's memorized, because you didn't do any copy and pasting here at all. All you did was some highlighting, but no copy and paste. So you can copy the ID, keep it in memory while you're going through all this. And then after you click next on the next screen, never take the time to do the search by looking up the person this way. Just put their ID in that great big box, put that little ID, and then click next. and it'll bring you to the final page that you have to work on. And if you've forgotten to tag, you can go back here and tag again. It's telling you we're working on a source for Ezra Shermer, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania death certificates. You're going to put a reason in there. So I'm putting in there the source shows that he died before 1900 census, because that's significant from this case. And then click Create and Attach. And the source is made. That's all you would have to do. And then, as you can see down here, this is what the source would look like in your source box. And add the year that he died, 1896, so it has a year there. It has the title as you had it and when you created it. Now, of course, this would be done by the patron when it's time for the patron to do it, but I want you to see how easy it is to pick a source up from Ancestry and be able to put it over in FamilySearch. Why pick this one? Because FamilySearch does not have the Philadelphia death certificates like FamilySearch or like Ancestry does. And they don't have that Union burial record from the Civil War soldiers. And so those things that aren't found at FamilySearch are okay to make a source for. And that's why we have that tool, RecordSeek, to do it. Okay, so here's my source sheet on Ezra. I would just hold on to this, and then when I meet with the patron, we can work on it and work our way down through it and add these things and create them. I haven't put the notes in here about the IDs for the Ezra's, that sort of thing, but that would be added to the sheet also, so that I'd have everything right in front of me and I know what I'm looking for. I should be able to find these censuses from the 1850, 60, 70, and 80 censuses all at FamilySearch now, because I have so much information. If for some reason I can't locate them, I can now go over to Ancestry and do creating a source from SourceLink or from RecordSeek if I need to. But I should be able to find them with all this information because I've copied and pasted the transcriptions. Okay. So this is what the family looks like now. Actually, today I played with it some more and I found the wife's maiden name, which was really strange because it was Sands, just like Ezra's mother's last name. This Anna Sands comes from a different Sands family that I've also done some research on, but I did not have her. But I really had to dig around, but I finally found a couple of sources that identify her as Anna M. Sands. So I did get a last name and I know who her parents are, so she's connected up to them. And I did some research on some of the kids today. It was really fun. I've enjoyed working on this family because there's new names to add to FamilySearch and old names that needed a lot of additions. So this is what our family looks like. It is not finished. There's still more to do. There's still details that are missing. So in conclusion, hopefully this class has helped you catch a vision of how you compare your research on FamilySearch with the research in Ancestry and build a more complete picture of your family. And remember, your goals ought always just to add new people to tree. Part of this process can be to identify the people, and if they're not in the right families, bring them together so that the families are more complete, more accurate. So, questions?